Black Janitor is brought into board meeting by CEO as a joke, but leaves the executives speechless. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft whisper, leaving Laverne Hill alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of other people's secrets. At 11:47 p.m., the 42nd floor of Sterling and Road Technologies belonged to her, and to the ghosts of conversations that still lingered in conference rooms where million-dollar decisions were made by men who had never missed a meal. Laverne pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway, her rubber-soled shoes silent against the cold floor. The brass nameplates on office doors caught the light like golden teeth in a corporate smile. Nathan Sterling, CEO. Marcus Rowe, CFO. Victoria Chin, VP of Operations. Names that commanded respect, feared by competitors, worshipped by business magazines. But Laverne knew something they didn't know she knew. She knew that Nathan Sterling kept a bottle of antacids in his bottom drawer, and popped them like candy during board meetings. She knew that Marcus Rowe had been quietly selling his company's stock for 3 months straight. She knew that Victoria Chin stayed late not because she was dedicated, but because she was avoiding the divorce papers waiting at home. Laverne knew these things because invisible people see everything. "Mrs. Hill? Is that you?" The voice came from the break room at the end of the hall. Laverne smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn since clocking in. She found Elliot Reyes hunched over his laptop at one of the small round tables, surrounded by crumpled energy bar wrappers and empty coffee cups. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually neat brown hair stuck up in frustrated tufts. "Child, what are you still doing here?" Laverne wheeled her cart to the doorway. "It's almost midnight." Elliot looked up, his dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion. At 26, he had the eager face of someone who still believed hard work automatically led to success. 3 months at Sterling and Rowe had begun to teach him otherwise. "Trying to make sense of these quarterly reports," he said, gesturing helplessly at his screen. "Mr. Sterling wants a cost analysis by tomorrow morning, but none of these numbers add up. It's like they're hiding something, but I can't figure out what." Laverne pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. This had become their routine, these late-night conversations when the building was empty and honest words could be spoken without fear of corporate ears. She'd been watching Elliot for weeks, seeing how his enthusiasm slowly dimmed as his ideas were dismissed, his insights ignored, his potential wasted by men who mistook arrogance for authority. "Show me," she said simply. Elliot hesitated. "Mrs. Hill, I appreciate you listening, but this is pretty technical financial stuff." "Elliot." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Show me." He turned the laptop toward her, and Laverne studied the spreadsheet with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. While Elliot saw numbers, Laverne saw patterns. While he focused on formulas, she read the story the data was trying to tell. "Here," she said, pointing to a column of expenses. "These consulting fees. Notice how they spike every quarter right before earnings reports?" Elliot leaned forward. "Yeah, I saw that. But Mr. Rose said those are standard operational consultants. At $2 million every 3 months?" Laverne raised an eyebrow. "Elliot, honey, I've been cleaning offices for 22 years. I've seen enough consultant reports to paper this whole building. Real consultants write recommendations. These files you're looking at? They're not about making the company better. They're about making the numbers look better." The young analyst stared at the screen with new eyes. "You're saying they're cooking the books?" "I'm saying they're seasoning them real nice," Laverne replied. "Making them taste better for investors who don't know what they're really eating." Elliot scrolled through more data, his excitement building. "If that's true, then the real operational costs are hidden in these consulting line items. Which means the actual profit margins are about 40% lower than what they're reporting," Laverne finished. "And that means this company isn't the golden goose everyone thinks it is." For a moment, they sat in silence. The revelation hung between them like a dangerous secret, which, Laverne knew, was exactly what it was. "How did you know?" Elliot asked quietly. "How did you see what I missed?" Laverne stood and walked to the window that overlooked the glittering city below. 42 floors down, people were living their lives, working night shifts, raising families, dreaming of better tomorrows. Most of them would never set foot in a boardroom, never make decisions that affected thousands of jobs, never have the power to choose between profit and people. When you're invisible, you learn to watch, she said. When you're quiet, you learn to listen. And when people think you don't matter, they forget to hide their truth from you. She turned back to Elliot, who was looking at her with something approaching awe. You know what your problem is? She continued. You're trying to play their game by their rules. But their rules are designed to make sure people like you never win. You're young, you're Hispanic, you didn't go to the right schools or join the right clubs. In their world, that makes you disposable. So what am I supposed to do? The frustration in his voice was raw, honest. Just accept it? Just let them keep ignoring me until they decide I'm not worth the salary. Laverne walked back to the table and placed her hand on his shoulder. You're supposed to remember that you see things they can't see. You understand things they refuse to understand. And when the time comes, and it will come, you're supposed to have the courage to speak up. Even if they don't listen? Especially if they don't listen. Her voice carried the weight of experience, of battles fought and lessons learned. Because the truth has a way of finding the light, Elliot. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to hold the flashlight. Elliot saved his work and closed the laptop. Mrs. Hill, can I ask you something personal? She nodded. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. How did you end up? He gestured vaguely at her uniform, then immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. Laverne smiled, but there was sadness in it. How did a smart woman end up pushing a mop around a corporate tower? I didn't mean. It's okay, honey. It's a fair question. She sat back down, her hands folded in her lap. Sometimes life gives you choices, and sometimes it gives you circumstances. I made some choices, faced some circumstances, and ended up here. But you know what I learned? Your job title doesn't define your worth. Your paycheck doesn't measure your wisdom. And the people who think they're better than you because they wear expensive suits? They're usually the ones who need to learn the most. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small paperback book, Leadership in Crisis by James McGregor Burns. The cover was worn, the pages marked with dozens of bookmarks. I read during my breaks, she explained. History, philosophy, business strategy, psychology. The library doesn't care if you're a CEO or a janitor. Knowledge is free for anyone who wants it. Elliot took the book, flipping through pages filled with handwritten notes in the margins. Why are you helping me? Because 26 years ago I was you, Laverne said quietly. Bright, eager, full of ideas that nobody wanted to hear. And because sometimes the best teacher is someone who's learned from their own mistakes. The building's ventilation system kicked on with a gentle whoosh, reminding them that the world kept turning even when everything felt still. Laverne stood and gathered her cleaning supplies. Get some sleep, Elliot. Tomorrow's going to be an interesting day. How do you know? She paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the hallway lights. Because change is coming to Sterling and Row. I can feel it in the air, like electricity before a thunderstorm. The question isn't whether it will happen, it's whether we'll be ready when it does. As Laverne disappeared down the hallway with her cart, Elliot remained at the table, staring at the book in his hands. He opened it to a random page and found a passage highlighted in yellow. The ultimate test of leadership is not the polls you take, but the risks you take for the convictions you hold. In the margin, written in Laverne's careful handwriting, were 4 words that made his heart race. Truth always finds a way. Outside the break room windows, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds, and somewhere in the corporate maze of Sterling and Row Technologies, the future was quietly reshaping itself in ways that no one, not even Laverne Hill, could fully imagine. But change was coming. And for the first time in months, Elliot Reyes fell asleep with hope instead of frustration, unaware that in less than 12 hours, everything he thought he knew about courage, wisdom, and power would be turned completely upside down. The Sterling and Row boardroom smelled like leather, mahogany, and desperation. At exactly 2 p.m., Nathan Sterling stood at the head of the polished conference table, his Harvard MBA diploma practically glowing on the wall behind him like a beacon of superiority. His tailored Armani suit cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he wore that fact like a badge of honor. "Gentlemen, ladies," Nathan began, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "We have a problem." The 12 board members shifted uncomfortably in their executive chairs. Marcus Rowe, the silver-haired CFO, cleared his throat nervously. Victoria Chen tapped her Mont Blanc pen against her leather portfolio. At the far end of the table, Elliot sat ramrod straight, his cheap tie feeling like a noose around his neck. "Our third quarter numbers are..." Nathan paused for dramatic effect. "Catastrophic." He clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted monitor displayed a graph that looked like a ski slope heading straight to hell. Revenue down 18%. Profit margin shrinking faster than ice cubes in August. Stock price hovering dangerously close to investor panic territory. "The board of directors is breathing down our necks," Nathan continued, pacing behind his chair like a caged lion. "Our shareholders are asking uncomfortable questions. The financial press is starting to circle like vultures. And frankly, the cost-cutting measures we've implemented so far have been about as effective as treating cancer with aspirin." Board member Patricia Blackwood, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Nathan?" "Aggressive restructuring," he replied without hesitation. "We're talking about cutting 40% of our workforce, outsourcing our entire IT department to Mumbai, and eliminating what the consultants call redundant operational expenses." Elliot's stomach twisted. He thought about the security guards who always smiled and said good morning, the accounting clerks who worked overtime without complaint, the maintenance staff who kept the building running smoothly. To Nathan, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet. To Elliot, they were people with families, mortgages, dreams. "The problem," Nathan continued, "is that we're hemorrhaging money on these so-called essential personnel who contribute nothing to our bottom line. Take our custodial staff, for instance. We're paying union wages for people to empty trash cans and mop floors. It's absurd." Marcus Rowe nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. We could contract that work out for half the cost." "Speaking of custodial staff," Nathan said, a cruel smile spreading across his face, "I happened to see our night janitor this morning during my early arrival. What's her name again?" He snapped his fingers theatrically. "Levin something. Hill, I think." Elliot's blood ran cold. He could see where this was heading, and every instinct screamed at him to speak up, to deflect, to protect the woman who had shown him more wisdom in 3 months than these executives had in their entire careers. "You know what?" Nathan's grin widened, feeding off the uncomfortable energy in the room. "Maybe we're approaching this all wrong. Maybe instead of paying expensive consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars for their expertise, we should be asking our cleaning lady for her insights. I'm sure she has plenty of ideas about cutting costs." A few board members chuckled nervously. Richard Pemberton, a heavy-set man who'd inherited his position from his father, actually snorted with laughter. "I mean, think about it," Nathan continued, warming to his cruel joke. "She sees every office, every department. She probably knows where all the waste is happening. Hell, she might be the most qualified person in this building to solve our budget crisis." The laughter grew louder. Victoria Chen covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile. Even Marcus was shaking his head with amusement. Only Elliot sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists under the table. He thought about Laverne's gentle wisdom, her keen insights, her quiet dignity. These people saw her as a punchline. They had no idea that the woman they were mocking could probably run their company better than they could. "You know what?" Nathan's voice took on a theatrical quality. "I have a brilliant idea. Why don't we invite Mrs. Hill to join our little crisis meeting? Get her expert janitorial perspective on corporate finance?" The room erupted in laughter now. Patricia Blackwood was actually wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh, Nathan, you're terrible," she gasped between giggles. "I'm serious." Nathan insisted, though his tone made it clear he was anything but. Let's get her up here. Maybe she can explain to us the finer points of fiscal responsibility while she tells us about the best way to clean conference room tables. Elliot's phone buzzed with a text message. His heart nearly stopped when he saw it was from building security. Mr. Reyes, there's a janitor here who says she was called to the 42nd floor boardroom. Should I send her up? The blood drained from Elliot's face. Somehow, someway, word had reached Laverne. Maybe a security guard had overheard Nathan's comments. Maybe someone had actually taken the CEO's joke seriously and sent for her. Actually, Nathan announced, checking his own phone with glee. It seems our invitation has been accepted. Mrs. Hill is on her way up. The laughter died to excited whispers. Board members straightened their ties and smoothed their hair, preparing for what they assumed would be a few minutes of harmless entertainment at the expense of a working-class woman who didn't know any better. Elliot's mind raced. He could speak up now, explain that this was wrong, that Laverne deserved better. But his voice caught in his throat. These people controlled his career, his future, his ability to pay off his student loans and help his family. One word of protest could end everything he'd worked for. This should be interesting, Nathan murmured, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. Outside the boardroom, they could hear the soft ding of the elevator arriving. Elliot closed his eyes and hated himself for his silence. The boardroom door opened with a soft click, and Laverne Hill stepped inside. She didn't hurry. She didn't apologize. She didn't display even a flicker of the embarrassment or confusion that everyone expected to see. Instead, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was, her cleaning uniform pressed and neat, her graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, her dark eyes taking in the room with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. You asked to see me, Mr. Sterling? Her voice was calm, respectful, but not deferential. It carried the weight of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. Nathan's grin faltered slightly. This wasn't going according to script. Where was the nervous laughter? The stammering confusion? The comic relief he'd ordered up for his board's entertainment? Yes, well. Nathan cleared his throat, trying to regain his theatrical momentum. Mrs. Hill, we were just discussing some rather complex financial challenges facing the company, and I thought, in jest of course, that perhaps you might have some insights to share. The board members leaned back in their chairs, waiting for the show to begin. Patricia Blackwood had her phone ready, probably planning to record whatever amusing spectacle was about to unfold. Laverne nodded slowly, as if she were genuinely considering the request. Financial challenges, she repeated thoughtfully. You mean the 18% revenue drop and the stock price that's about to trigger a shareholder revolt? The smiles began to fade. Or are you referring to the $2 million in quarterly consulting fees that aren't actually going to consultants? Laverne continued, her tone conversational, almost casual. The money that's being used to artificially inflate your profit margins by hiding operational costs in fictional line items? Nathan's face went pale. What are you talking about? Laverne stepped closer to the conference table, but she didn't sit. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, like a professor addressing a classroom of particularly slow students. I'm talking about the fact that your cost-cutting strategy is based on fraudulent numbers, she said simply. You're planning to fire 40% of your workforce to solve a budget crisis that doesn't actually exist, at least not in the way you think it does. The room was dead silent now. Marcus Rowe's face had gone from amused to stricken. Victoria Chen sat frozen, her pen hovering over her notepad. The real problem, Laverne continued, isn't that you're spending too much on essential personnel. The real problem is that you're hemorrhaging money on executive bonuses, inflated consultant contracts, and luxury expenses that have nothing to do with running a business and everything to do with feeding your egos. She walked slowly around the table, her eyes meeting each board member's gaze in turn. Last month alone, this company spent $47,000 on Mr. Rowe's business dinners, $63,000 on corporate retreat amenities, $85,000 on what the books call strategic partnership development, which, from what I observed, seems to consist mainly of golf tournaments and wine tastings. Richard Pemberton shifted uncomfortably in his chair. How could you possibly know? I clean your offices, Laverne said simply. I empty your trash cans. I see your credit card statements, your expense reports, your private emails printed and thrown away because you assumed no one important would ever read them. Nathan found his voice, though it came out higher than usual. Even if what you're saying were true, which it isn't, you have no business. I have every business, Laverne interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluster like a blade. Because when you fire those 40% of workers, you'll be destroying the lives of people who actually make this company run. The security guards who keep your buildings safe. The IT specialists who keep your systems operating. The accountants who balance your books, the real ones, not the fantasy versions you show investors. She paused in front of the wall-mounted monitor, still displaying the devastating revenue chart. You want to know what real leadership looks like? Laverne asked. It's not about protecting your own comfort while other people pay the price for your mistakes. Real leadership means asking hard questions. Like, why are we spending more on executive perks than on employee training? Why are we cooking our books instead of cooking up genuine solutions? And most importantly, what kind of leaders are we if our first instinct is to save ourselves by destroying the people who trusted us? The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Elliot stared at Laverne with something approaching awe, watching her dismantle these powerful men and women with nothing but truth and quiet courage. Nathan stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who actually understands your business better than you do, Laverne finished. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the velvet. Mr. Sterling, I've been watching this company for 3 years. I've seen how decisions get made, how money gets spent, how people get treated. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that your current path leads to bankruptcy, federal investigation, and a lot of good people suffering for your arrogance. She turned to address the entire room. You asked for my insights, and here they are. Stop treating symptoms and start addressing the disease. The disease isn't excess personnel costs, it's excess executive privilege. The disease isn't operational inefficiency, it's moral inefficiency. And the disease isn't a budget crisis, it's a leadership crisis. Nathan's hand trembled as he pointed toward the door. Get out. Now. Before I call security. But before Laverne could respond, a voice spoke up from the far end of the table, a voice that surprised everyone, including its owner. Wait. Every head turned toward Elliot Reyes, who was standing up slowly, his face pale but determined. For the first time in months, he looked like he remembered who he used to be before this place tried to make him small. She's right, Elliot said, his voice growing stronger with each word. About all of it. The storm that had been building in that boardroom for months was finally about to break. The silence that followed Elliot's words felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Nathan Sterling's face cycled through several shades of red, while the board members stared at the young analyst as if he just announced he could fly. Excuse me? Nathan's voice was dangerously quiet. What did you just say? Elliot's hands were shaking, but his voice held steady. I said she's right, Mr. Sterling. About the consulting fees, about the executive spending, about all of it. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, it was with the conviction of someone who had finally remembered his own worth. And I can prove it. He reached for his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard with newfound purpose. The wall monitor switched from Nathan's ski slope revenue chart to Elliot's own analysis. Months of late-night work, guided by Laverne's wisdom and fueled by his determination to uncover the truth. For the past 3 months, Elliot began, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've been trying to understand why our numbers don't add up. Every time I brought my concerns to senior management, I was told I was missing the big picture. That I didn't understand how real business worked. He clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed breakdown of the mysterious consulting fees Laverne had identified. But I had help. Mrs. Hill. He turned to acknowledge Laverne, who stood watching with quiet pride. Has been my mentor. She taught me to look beyond the numbers to see the patterns. To ask not just what but why and who benefits. Victoria Chen's pen had stopped moving entirely. Marcus Rowe looked like he was about to be sick. Mrs. Hill showed me that these consulting fees aren't random operational expenses. Elliot continued, clicking through increasingly damning charts. They're a shell game. Money gets moved from legitimate operational accounts into these fictional consulting budgets, making our profit margins appear healthier than they actually are. Patricia Blackwood leaned forward, her earlier amusement completely evaporated. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Reyes. It's a very serious crime, Ms. Blackwood, Elliot replied. And it gets worse. The next slide showed executive compensation compared to employee wages over the past 3 years. The graph looked like a canyon, executive salaries skyrocketing while worker pay remained flat. While we've been freezing cost of living increases for our essential personnel, executive bonuses have increased by 67%, Elliot said. Mr. Sterling's compensation package alone could fund the salaries of 43 full-time employees. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard Pemberton was no longer making eye contact. But here's what Mrs. Hill taught me that you apparently never learned in business school, Elliot said, his confidence building with every word. A company isn't just a collection of profit centers and cost reduction opportunities. It's a community of people whose lives depend on the decisions made in rooms like this. He clicked to his final presentation, a comprehensive restructuring plan that he and Laverne had developed during their late-night conversations. Instead of laying off 40% of our workforce, we could implement what I call sustainable excellence protocols, Elliot explained. Cut executive perks by 75%, eliminate the fraudulent consulting contracts, reinvest in employee training and development, and focus on long-term growth instead of quarterly stock manipulation. The numbers on screen were undeniable. Employee retention would improve. Customer satisfaction would increase. Operating costs would actually decrease as skilled, motivated workers became more efficient. The financial impact? Elliot clicked to a projection chart. Within 18 months, we'd see a genuine 23% increase in productivity, a 41% reduction in turnover costs, and authentic profit margins that could sustain long-term growth. Nathan finally found his voice. This is fantasy. Pure idealistic nonsense from someone who's never had to make hard decisions. Like the hard decision to steal from your own employees? Elliot interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. Because that's what you've been doing. Every dollar you've hidden in fake consulting fees is money that should have gone to the people who actually create value in this company. Laverne stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. The young man has done his homework, Mr. Sterling. The question is, are you brave enough to face the truth he's uncovered? Mrs. Hill didn't just teach me about financial analysis, Elliot continued, looking directly at Nathan. She taught me about leadership. Real leadership means serving the people who trust you, not serving yourself at their expense. It means having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the wisdom to listen to people you've been trained to ignore. He gestured toward Laverne. You brought her up here as a joke. You thought her insights would be worthless because she pushes a mop instead of pushing paper. But in 15 minutes, she's shown more business acumen than this entire board has demonstrated in the past year. The room was electric with tension. Some board members looked intrigued by the data. Others appeared defensive, angry. Nathan looked like he was considering calling security. Everything I know about reading financial patterns, about understanding human motivation, about seeing the big picture, I learned from Mrs. Hill, Elliot declared. She may clean your offices, but she's the one who really understands what makes this company work. Laverne placed a gentle hand on Elliot's shoulder. You found your voice, she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Now let's see if they find their conscience. The moment stretched taut between them, between old ways and new possibilities, between fear and courage, between the comfortable lie of business as usual and the uncomfortable truth of what real leadership required. Nathan Sterling stood at the head of the table, his empire of arrogance cracking like ice in spring. The question hanging in the air wasn't just about financial restructuring or employee retention. It was about what kind of people they chose to be when the whole world was watching. The boardroom erupted like a fault line splitting apart. "This is absolutely ridiculous." Richard Pemberton slammed his hand on the table, his face purple with indignation. "We're going to restructure a multi-billion-dollar corporation based on the advice of a janitor and some junior analyst who's been here 5 minutes? 3 months, Elliot corrected quietly, but Pemberton bulldozed over him. "I don't care if it's 3 years. This woman," he jabbed a finger toward Laverne, "empties trash cans for a living. She has no business school training, no corporate experience, no understanding of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders." But Patricia Blackwood was studying Elliot's projections on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. "Actually, Richard, these numbers are quite compelling. If even half of these efficiency improvements materialized." "You can't be serious, Patricia." Marcus Rowe's voice cracked with desperation. "We'd be laughed out of every boardroom in the country. The business journals would have a field day. Would they?" Dr. Sarah Chin, Victoria's younger sister and the newest board member, spoke for the first time. "Or would they write about the company that had the courage to innovate beyond traditional cost-cutting strategies?" Victoria shot her sister a warning look, but Sarah continued. "I've been watching the employment data for months. Companies that invest in their workforce during downturns consistently outperform those that don't. Mrs. Hill's approach isn't radical, it's smart." Nathan's phone had been buzzing incessantly. He glanced at it, and his face went ashen. "We need to table this discussion immediately." "Why?" Laverne asked, her voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. Nathan's eyes darted around the room. "Because..." He looked at his phone again, and Elliot caught a glimpse of multiple news alerts lighting up the screen. "Because this is a private board meeting, and certain, sensitive discussions shouldn't be." "Too late for that," Dr. Chin said, holding up her own phone. "LinkedIn is already buzzing about dramatic confrontation at Sterling and Rowe. Someone recorded part of this meeting." The blood drained from Nathan's face. "Who? How?" Patricia looked guilty as she tucked her phone into her purse. "I may have shared a few thoughts on social media. About unexpected wisdom coming from unexpected sources. You posted about this?" Nathan's voice rose to a near shriek. "A professional observation about leadership," Patricia said defensively. "I didn't name names, but well, people are drawing their own conclusions." Marcus was frantically scrolling through his phone. Business Insider just published a piece called "When the Help Knows More Than the Bosses." The Wall Street Journal has picked it up. And his voice faltered. Forbes is running a live blog about corporate accountability at Sterling and Rowe. Nathan sank into his chair as if someone had cut his strings. The man who had started this meeting as a predator now looked like cornered prey. "Mr. Sterling," Laverne said gently, "this is what happens when you try to make someone invisible. Eventually, the light finds them anyway. We need to control this narrative." Nathan muttered, running his hands through his hair. "Spin it. Make it go away. Or," said Dr. Chin, "we could embrace it. Show that Sterling and Rowe is the kind of company that listens to wisdom wherever it comes from. The media is watching us now," Patricia added, her voice gaining strength. "If we dismiss Mrs. Hill and Mr. Reyes after this goes public, we'll look like the arrogant, out-of-touch executives everyone already thinks we are." Richard Pemberton scoffed. "So we're going to let public relations dictate business strategy?" "We're going to let good sense dictate business strategy," Dr. Chin replied firmly. Nathan looked around the room, calculating. Elliot could practically see the wheels turning in his head, weighing ego against survival, pride against pragmatism. "Fine," Nathan said finally, his voice hollow. "Let's vote. All in favor of whatever this alternative restructuring plan is called." "Sustainable Excellence Protocols," Elliot supplied. "Right. All in favor?" Dr. Chen's hand shot up immediately. Patricia followed, then two other board members Elliot didn't know well. After a long moment, Victoria raised her hand as well. All opposed? Richard Pemberton's hand went up, along with Marcus and two others. Nathan stared at the tie vote, his own hand hovering uncertainly in the air. The room held its breath. This is insane, he whispered. Then louder. But firing 800 people when the whole world is watching us would be professional sabotage. His hand rose slowly, breaking the tie. The room exhaled collectively. Mrs. Hill, Nathan said, his voice carefully neutral. I suppose we owe you a debt of gratitude. Perhaps we could discuss a consulting position, or a role in our new, whatever this becomes. Laverne shook her head with a gentle smile. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I already have a job. But surely you'd want some recognition, some official capacity. Recognition? Laverne's laugh was warm, knowing. Son, I've been recognized by the people who matter. This young man found his courage. This company might find its soul. That's all the recognition I need. She looked around the room, meeting each executive's eyes in turn. You want to know what real leadership looks like? It's not about titles or corner offices or having your name on the building. Real leadership is about service. It's about making the lives of others better, not making yourself more important. And it's about understanding that the moment you think you're too important to learn from anyone, janitor, analyst, or anyone else, that's the moment you stop being worthy of leading anyone. The boardroom fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of shock or anger. It was the silence of people finally beginning to understand. 6 weeks later, Sterling and Rowe Technologies looked the same from the outside. Same gleaming glass tower, same marble lobby, same brass nameplates on executive doors. But inside, everything had changed. Elliot walked through the accounting department on a Tuesday morning, watching teams that had been scheduled for termination now working with renewed energy. The sustainable excellence protocols had been implemented gradually, and the results were undeniable. Employee satisfaction surveys showed a 47% improvement in morale. Customer retention had increased by 31%. And the stock price, after an initial dip when news of the janitor revolution broke, had climbed to its highest point in 2 years. Mr. Reyes, called Maria Santos from the IT help desk. I wanted to thank you again for saving our department. My daughter starts college next month, and I was so scared about losing my insurance. Elliot smiled, but he knew the credit didn't belong to him. Thank Mrs. Hill when you see her, Maria. This was all her wisdom. The media attention had been intense but ultimately positive. Harvard Business Review published a case study titled, Invisible Wisdom: How Sterling and Rowe Revolutionized Corporate Leadership. Forbes featured Laverne on their cover with the headline, The $2 Million Janitor, When Cleaning House Means Cleaning Up Ethics. But the most profound changes were quieter, more personal. Nathan Sterling had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The arrogant CEO who had mocked Laverne that day in the boardroom now arrived at the office each evening around 11 p.m., not to work late, but to learn. He would walk the halls during the night shift, talking to security guards about building safety, asking maintenance workers about operational efficiency, listening to cleaning staff discuss ways to reduce waste. Evening, Mr. Sterling, Laverne would say when their paths crossed, always with the same gentle respect she'd shown everyone, as if he hadn't tried to humiliate her in front of the board. Evening, Mrs. Hill, he would reply, and sometimes they would talk about leadership, about responsibility, about the weight of making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Nathan had become her most unlikely student, learning humility from the woman whose wisdom he tried to mock. The board meetings had changed too. Gone were the days of dismissing ideas based on who presented them. Dr. Chen had instituted perspective panels, where employees from every level could present insights directly to leadership. Richard Pemberton had quietly resigned, but most of the other board members had embraced the new culture. Even Marcus Rowe, after a period of sullen resistance, had begun implementing transparent financial reporting practices. But tonight was different. Tonight was Laverne's last night. Elliot found her in the break room where their journey had begun, sitting at the same small table where she'd first opened his eyes to the truth. Her cleaning cart was parked nearby, but something was missing. "Where's your mop?" he asked. Laverne smiled, that warm, knowing expression that had guided him through so many late-night conversations. "Won't be needing it anymore." Elliot's heart sank. "You're leaving? But Mrs. Hill, the company is finally listening. You've got Nathan Sterling asking maintenance workers for advice. You've transformed this entire place. Which is exactly why it's time for me to go," she said gently. "My job here is done." She reached into her bag and pulled out a book, not the worn paperback on leadership she'd shared before, but a fresh hardcover, Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power and Greatness by Robert Greenleaf. "This is for you," she said, placing it in his hands. "Keep reading. And keep watching." Elliot felt tears threatening. "I don't understand. You've become the most respected voice in this building. People hang on your every word. The board seeks your counsel. And that," Laverne said, standing and gathering her things, "is exactly the problem." She looked out the window at the city lights below, the same view they'd shared so many nights. "The moment people start putting you on a pedestal, you stop being able to see clearly from down where the real work happens. The moment you become the voice everyone listens to, you stop hearing the voices that really need to be heard." She turned back to him, her expression serious but kind. "Besides, this company doesn't need Laverne Hill anymore. It needs Elliot Reyes. It needs someone young enough to keep questioning, brave enough to keep challenging, humble enough to keep learning. It needs someone who remembers that leadership isn't about being right, it's about creating space for others to find their own rightness." Elliot clutched the book to his chest. "How will I know if I'm doing it right?" "The same way I knew," she said softly. "By staying invisible enough to see everything, quiet enough to hear the truth, and brave enough to speak up when the moment calls for it." She walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing, Elliot. Remember that the most powerful lessons often come from the people others laugh at. The janitor, the intern, the secretary, the security guard, they see things from angles that corner offices can't reach. Your job now is to make sure those voices are never invisible again." As she disappeared down the hallway for the last time, Elliot opened the book. On the first page, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "To Elliot, you found your voice. Now help others find theirs. The best teachers are those who create more teachers, not more followers." 3 months later, when Fortune magazine named Sterling and Rowe Company of the Year for innovative leadership practices, they interviewed Elliot about the transformation. "What was the most important lesson you learned?" the reporter asked. Elliot thought about that night in the boardroom, about laughter turning to silence, about wisdom emerging from the most unexpected places. That the most powerful people in any organization are often the ones everyone else thinks are powerless, he said. And the most dangerous thing a leader can do is assume that worth comes from a title instead of from wisdom. The boardroom at Sterling and Rowe never laughed at wisdom again, no matter where it came from. But the world outside had finally started to listen,